I was changing who I was to fit what I thought my manager and other people around me needed. And this woman showed me who I was, okay? And she was like, this is really interesting because you're all about women's empowerment and all of that, but you're changing who you are for these guys at the top. And she's like, so aren't you sort of enabling the patriarchy? And I was like, dog, I gotta go.
That's Mackenzie Hughes. Her background is super cool. She got a decade of tech experience, but actually started her career as a political and nonprofit campaign canvasser, basically on the road, knocking on doors, asking for donations, that kind of stuff. Gets into tech, gets into sales, then customer success, and eventually finds her way into product management, where she worked her way all the way up to head of product operations at a very large company before leaving and co-founding her own company called GoldHue. So GoldHue is all about partnering with product leaders at startups and scale-ups to help them be more successful. In this conversation, we're going to get into Mackenzie's story and the speed bumps from getting over public speaking fears to getting feedback about her professionalism, walking away from a job that was no longer fulfilling. We get into all of it. If you're new here, real quick, my name is Andrew, and this is a show where I get to have amazing and candid and vulnerable conversations with my guests about some of the toughest moments that almost derailed their careers and instead become part of their success story. So it's enough from me. Let's jump in and hear from Mackenzie.
I grew up on Long Island. My parents, I have two older brothers, so I am the youngest. I think if you asked my family what sort of like persona I fulfill, I would be the funny one. One thing that I really love about my childhood is I've carried the friends that I kept close from like ages 3 through to now. And I am 34 and I am still very close with those people. So something about the environment and us just carrying through from like, school ages 3 to 18 brought us to be very good friends. And it's a really diverse and interesting group. And I was also a very artsy, creative kid. Like everybody else on Long Island, I had a little emo band. We weren't very good, but, we were playing our stuff. And the last thing I'll mention is I got working pretty early.
What were you doing? What was like your first 2 jobs when you started to work in whatever way that is?
So around ages 14 or 15, my dad was a like super at an apartment complex. So he enlisted me to work there. And I was painting cabinets and like sidewalk curbs and cleaning and all those types of jobs. I definitely worked in retail for a bit throughout high school. Like I worked at Forever 21 and like PacSun for short stints. So those were the main jobs and where I got started. So my parents definitely instilled a deep work ethic in me.
I was curious if you came from a family of either entrepreneurs or tech folks, sort of wondering how you go from painting cabinets and sidewalks and, I feel like everybody in high school had a job like a PacSun or some equivalent to like some retail job, but curious how you start taking the first few steps into what has become your career.
Not at all. Not at all. My mom was a teacher for 15 years and then she became a dean at the same high school that she taught at. So in New York, what that means is like she worked with the kids. Kids have multiple teachers that they're going throughout their careers. And my mom worked with the students from grades 9 through 12 and sort of like acted as a shepherd in a way. And that sort of consistent force in the students' lives. And my dad, again, like always worked with his hands. My dad's a contractor now and can build anything from scratch. I got none of that, like nothing. I have 2 older brothers. My eldest works in commodities trading. And then my other brother, he does own businesses, but they're a bit different. My brother Adam co-owns a modeling company in New York. And he also co-owns a restaurant and a wine bar down in Miami. So we've all come into very different lines of work. I think every single person in my family works very hard and they're very purpose driven as well. So I think that might have helped sort of shape me into becoming an entrepreneur. And I think the biggest thing too is like my parents were very much about do what you love and figure out your interests, right? Like they always requested that we be involved in something, but they did not demand we do a particular thing. We got a lot of like space to figure out who we were and what our interests were without any pressure from them.
So if we could go back in time, walk into PacSun, find the 18-year-old version of you there, what would surprise that version of you the most about the life you've built and the career that you've scaled since then?
I think any achievement that I've had would surprise me because I was not a great student in elementary school. I was not a great student for most of high school. I struggled a lot in school. I was only diagnosed with ADHD in the past couple of years. So I had a lot of focusing problems. I like to get a lot of attention in school from the other students, making jokes and sort of like class clowning a bit. So I didn't start doing well until maybe 11th, 12th grade, and then throughout college. So if you were to talk to me at that sort of midpoint in high school, I would be shocked that I achieved any success at all.
How does the tech journey begin for you? Give us like the 10,000 foot view from how you go from that version of you and starting to morph into the version that I've gotten to meet.
Yeah, so my career did not start in tech. I started off in more like political and nonprofit campaign work. If you've ever seen a canvasser on the street or had them knock on your door, like that's what I was up to, and that's what my teams were up to. It's like the hardest work you can ever do.
I would imagine. Yeah, I would imagine you build a ton of resilience and just like, because you have to, right? Or else you wouldn't last in that job.
First of all, it was like 80 to 100 hours a week. You're out there doing all the things your mom told you not to do, right? You're talking to strangers about politics and then also asking them for money. Like, it's really challenging, but it helped me build up a lot of resilience and a lot of the sales skills that I've honed over the years for sure. And I did that for a few years and I did it in multiple places. I did it in Boston, New York, Raleigh, LA. I moved around quite a bit straight out of college. And that's something that I will always be grateful for. Just moving around in different places. After that, I did a very short stint in PR, which not really a great fit for me, but the campaign stuff was a bit unsustainable, right? Like I love the work. I worked on the Obama campaign back in 2012 and like raised money for the ACLU and Planned Parenthood. I'm so proud of that work, but it was exhausting and I couldn't do it anymore. So that's sort of what headed me into PR. And then in 2014, my very good friend, who is still one of my best friends, was working at a startup. It was tiny. It was like seed stage, a few people. And they were building out a product that basically was like the LinkedIn for marginalized communities. So obviously like there was that purpose-driven thread there that pulled me in. And it was funny because the first, like I got the job and the first thing we had to do was move to San Francisco to participate in an incubator program. So we were there for months and I got addicted to it. I loved the energy. I loved how quickly I was able to learn from everybody around me and sort of build that business acumen. And, you know, if you recall back in 2014, like tech was wild. Anybody, like everybody and their mother at a startup, everybody was getting all the money. It was like contagious. And being in the Bay Area, being near Silicon Valley during that time was like, it was an era. Very different than how it was today. So that was sort of my start in tech.
This episode of the show is brought to you by one of my favorite products, Fullstory. When I led the growth team at Wistia, we spent a ton of time optimizing our new user onboarding experience. We ran experiment after experiment to improve our activation flow, but after a while, we felt like we plateaued a little bit until we started something that completely changed everything, which we called Fullstory Fridays. Every Friday, we'd fire up Fullstory and we'd watch 20 to 30 real users go through our product for the very first time. And it was painful. We saw people get lost. We saw them get stuck. We saw rage clicking on unclickable elements. One time we had a user get 3 pop-ups at the exact same time, which our engineer hated. But those sessions completely changed how we worked as a team. Instead of guessing what to build, what to fix, what bugs to prioritize, We saw exactly where users were getting stuck in our flow, and we left with tons of new actionable ideas and fixes, from better copy, smoother UI, and ultimately less friction points. Fullstory made this super easy, which is why I love the product. We used a ton of session replays on my team. There's now predictive modeling that you can use to drive personalization. There's AI-driven insights. You don't have to wonder what's not working anymore like my team did. You can see it. So if you're working in growth, product, or UX, Fullstory will change how you build and has become a huge part of the growth operating system that I teach to all my clients. You can see it for yourself at fullstory.com/value. That's fullstory.com/value. So now you're in tech, you're living out in Silicon Valley or in the area. Can you tell us about a challenging moment that you encountered, maybe early in your career? Because I feel like those are the real like personal growth moments, or can be for a lot of us. What comes to mind for you as I ask that?
Nothing was easy. I don't think anything was easy. Like nothing about working in tech other than, working really hard and burning the midnight oil was like a natural thing. I think at my first startup, it was just, we were hitting the pavement trying to get customers and like figuring out how to ask questions and like pitch and, get customers on board and getting them comfortable was really hard. I think when I moved on to other startups, right, the challenges became a little bit different, right? Like I started getting leadership roles and figuring out how to manage people and upskill them and help them grow their career while I'm still learning things is like a really, really interesting challenge to tackle. Every single company I've been at has not been a like smooth, this is, easy second nature. Everything had its different set of challenges, and there was so much variety in what I'd be running into, really.
And so is there a moment that you can think back on that ends up becoming this great personal growth moment that, even though it ends up becoming a good ending, was tough in the moment?
As an anxious person, every like major milestone or every major thing that I needed to do came with a lot of fear. But I think one particular moment that really, really shaped me was the president of my company at the time nominated me for a speaking engagement for this organization called Reaching Out MBA. And I had to go speak at NYU in front of a load of people, right? Not only did I have to give a speech, but I also had to participate in a panel discussion with like one person on the panel was the first LGBTQ mayor of Texas, like really impressive people. And when he had asked me, I obviously said yes. And I was just terrified. Like every day leading up, I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like I'm going to pass out on stage. And I remember even like I was backstage, Andrew, and I remember just talking to the person behind me. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't get on the stage. Don't make me. And she's like, get up there. You're fine. And then once I got out there and got on stage, I like really settled in. And it turned out to be a really rewarding experience. Every time I conquer that fear, that anxiety, I feel like there's nothing better than the moments after that. You're like, oh, it's like the biggest dopamine hit of all time. It really boosted my confidence and I was really, really proud of myself. And that usually is something that works for me is like that exposure therapy where I'm like, I just have to do it. Even if it just stresses me out so badly. I would say that's one of those moments that's like a big moment of personal growth where it's like, I can do this. I can get up there and I can give a speech. I can talk on a panel and feel okay.
And how many people was it in front of?
It was like one of those big NYU lecture halls. So there were probably a few hundred people.
And had you ever spoken in front of that many people before?
Actually, yes, because when I was doing my campaign work, we did a lot of student recruiting. So I had to go and talk in front of lecture halls. But there's something about like getting older where you start realizing the gravity of the situation and it gives you more anxiety. So yes, I had done it, but it just like did not, it wasn't as like integral or important to my career. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to go talk to these kids. No big deal.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. I'm working really hard to turn this into something special. And if you haven't already, subscribing is the best way for you to support what I'm up to. It helps those algorithms find more people like you, but more importantly, helps me to understand if I'm making something that's valuable. And that's the whole goal here. So if you're feeling extra generous, a quick rating or review if you're on the audio platforms like Spotify or Apple, or a like if you're on YouTube, also make a massive difference. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. That's so funny. That's like a theme that I've lived and that I see all the time getting to do this show and to talk to people who have all these different experiences. There's like a braveness that happens early in your career when you sort of don't know the consequences, or you don't even know that there could be consequences. And the answer is always with enthusiasm to whatever it is. Like, oh, do you want to present to the board? Yeah. That's the first time I could do that, right? And it's only when you get later in your career that you're like, fuck, I don't want to do that. That sounds scary, or that seems this.
And like somebody informs you that it was embarrassing, and then there's no going back. There's no going back.
Yeah. Okay, so you're nervous, so you're backstage, you're thinking about bailing out. So you can't really bail at that point, right? So you're there, so you woke up that day, you schlepped over there, you tried to put a brave face on. Is there a moment during when you're in front of the room where you start to settle in? Like, can you remember the moment where it was like, okay, you caught your breath and things kind of like came into focus?
Very clearly, actually. So I think what was helpful was the president of my company was sitting in the front row, and I just looked at him and he looked so happy and proud.
Oh, he was there.
Yeah. And I was scared of that too. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm here representing our company and the president's right there. But like just seeing that gave me a bit of confidence. And I think just slowing down for a second and just being very present is a hard thing for me to do, but I recall like that just kind of automatically happening as I was speaking on stage. And yeah, there's nothing like it, because you're like, all right, I'm gonna get through this. I'm not going to pass out and die right now. That's pretty cool.
I feel like the first 30 seconds are the worst. Have you ever gone skydiving, as like a side note?
Oh, Andrew, do I sound like, based on this conversation, do I sound like somebody that would be skydiving?
Well, pushing through fear has been a theme so far.
That's
so
true. That's true. You're right. Maybe I don't believe in myself enough to conquer that one. But have you been skydiving?
I have. And I'm bringing it up because it's like this. I did skydiving once. I'm petrified of heights in the way that I'm also scared of public speaking. But heights is probably my biggest fear. And when I was in college, I did a study abroad in Australia, the first many new experiences in a study abroad. And so a friend of mine was like, dude, we got to go. And so we were in Bondi Beach. I was right near Sydney, dorms on the beach, incredible. Yeah. We go to Bondi Beach for like spring break, also incredible. We're on the beach. He was like, this is the place. We can go skydiving, land on the beach. And I was like, again, like you, before I could really think about it, I was like, sure, let's just fucking do it. And so, yeah. So we did it. And it's just like this, where it's really the first 6 seconds, you can't breathe and you have that falling feeling and you're out of control and you are like, I'm just going to die. That's it. And then something happens after that where things slow. And it's sort of like if you were to put your hand out the window on the highway, like it just feels like a lot of wind, but it doesn't feel like you're falling anymore, and you settle in. And that's what it feels like, I think, for most people with public speaking. First 30 seconds, you can't breathe. You might die. You might cry. Like anything bad that could happen is going to happen during that first 30 seconds. Then you make it through and things slow down a little bit. And that's kind of what you're describing.
Exactly. Yes, very much like that. Now I'm like, should I try the skydiving? Like, I guess I could handle it.
Skydiving is one of those things where I did it when I was younger and more naive. And now I'm like, I think I'm good. I think I'm glad I ticked that box off.
That's what I'm saying. We get older and we just like know too much.
So what's your advice to someone who's listening to this, whether the thing is public speaking or something else? Because you push through the fear. And so that's the thing that I'm curious to explore. Yeah. So what would be your advice to someone who's listening to this, who maybe has had something, maybe they're in that messy middle where like they've signed up for a thing and now they've got to do it, and like they have this long runway of being nervous leading up to it? Or maybe someone who their default is not to say yes. What would be your advice to someone like that to push through?
I don't have a particular bit of advice, and I'll tell you why. Because I think everybody has if you have some sort of anxiety, you have a different flavor, and there's different things that work for you. And I've tried many things. I'm telling you about moments where I've been resilient and I've pushed through, but there are absolutely moments where I have bowed out. Do I feel great after I bow out? Not in particular, but this like remains an ongoing battle and will probably be an ongoing battle for me for the rest of my life, likely. So I guess the only piece of advice that I would give is like, figure out what works for you. Like figure out your anxiety defeating playbook, right? So for me, I need to create a state of calm physically. And sometimes that takes like a little bit of meditation and changes in my breathing. At different points in my life, different mechanisms have worked as well, right? They may not work anymore. And maybe 5 years from now, something else will help me to conquer the fear. So I think it's just get to know yourself, try to create a safe home in your body as much as you can, and try out different techniques until you figure out what works for you for the time being, and continue to explore that over time because it's going to change, right? What worked for you in the past might not work for you in the future. So keep learning about yourself, I guess.
And trying a bunch of shit, which is kind of what I heard you say, right? Try out all the things to see what sticks.
Right.
So you survived this situation, get off the stage. You said you felt like $1 million, which is cool. And I think relatable, right? So a lot of folks, when you face the fears and you make it through on the other side, gives you this superpower, at least for some period of time. Can you tell us about a low point, another low point in the journey? I know that that's one that you survived, but what's one of the lower points in your career journey?
Honestly, it was my last role. It was one of those that like walking in, something in my gut didn't sit right, but I ignored it, which is also a theme for me, sort of gaslighting myself and being like, it's probably a you problem. It has nothing to do with anything else, right?
Before we get into all the deets, can you contextualize, maybe without sharing the name of the company if you don't want to share that, but just the type of company, like rough size and what your role is, just to contextualize first?
Yeah, the company was maybe 1,500, 2,000 people, and my role was the head of product operations. And the product and engineering team was pretty sizable, probably about 500 to 600 people. So it was a big role, and I was very, very excited about it. And I think a couple of things come into play that created that low point for me. I want to be clear though, like I am very glad to have had the experience. It was absolutely what I needed to get through to come to where I am today. And I also had really good experiences there as well, right? Like I had very incredible, supportive coworkers who were really the highlight of that experience and who I keep in close touch with now and probably will for the rest of my life. But I think there were a lot of things. I think my previous role, I had a lot of confidence coming out of that. But at the same time, as I started growing a little bit disillusioned with tech in general and like where the industry was actually going and heading towards, it felt like it was becoming less of the place that I stepped into in 2014. That was very like inclusive, accepting, fail fast, experiment, be very curious, which is very aligned with who I was, to suddenly we're post ZERP, VCs don't have cash. There's like AI kicking people out of the workforce and like this general conservative shift, which is what we've all seen play out on the world stage at this point, right? So there was something in me that I was like, I don't know if I'm really feeling this. There's just things that are off.
And was that from the jump? Like, was this one of those things where it was like first week something just felt off, or was it like you were 6 months in and something just wasn't clicking?
Straight out the gate, there was like the feelings, and then it started reaching a rolling boil, maybe 6 months to a year in, and I was just completely stressed out of my mind, dreading pretty much every day, and just feeling like I had lost every ability. I was like, do I even know how to work anymore? Which was really weird because, I mentioned earlier that when I was younger, I didn't get much validation around my intelligence or my abilities. And throughout college, I started getting that a bit. But then when I entered the workforce, I got so much positive reinforcement and validation around like, wow, you're really smart, you're really creative, you're really good at your job, right? And I stopped getting that at this particular job. So it hit me very hard. And again, I got a lot of valuable insights and skills at that place. But yeah, from off the rip, it did not feel good. And I just did not listen to that inner voice telling me this is not the right role for you. And it was a really low point, and not only with my work where I felt like I couldn't even provide the value that I was always able to, but even at home, it was almost like the work was taking up all of the RAM in my head. And I remember when I was speaking to my partner, she would be sort of talking to me and I'd be like thinking about the work in the back and sort of just like responding to her as needed, but I was completely not present for her or my family and friends. And, I really value things like working out and eating well, cooking. Like I have a good amount of hobbies, and I was just like not engaged in it anymore.
Thank you for sharing. I think that's a story that a lot of folks will relate to. I think especially work consuming a lot of your mental energy and a lot of your personal identity is common. I'm curious for you, why do you think that happened? Like, did you have a lot riding on this role? Was it because you were coming in senior? Did you put a lot of pressure on yourself to make it work? Because there's a version of this story where you go in, your spidey senses tingle a little bit, and you're like, no, this isn't really the place for me, but I'll stay for 2 years or whatever, right? And that didn't happen. And I'm curious if there was some internal dialogue behind it.
Yeah, I think I have always put a lot of pressure on myself, and I did too much at this point, right? Like, I was essentially treating it like every day I was a surgeon and there was a body on the table and a person that I needed to save, which is crazy. Like, it's tech. I did not feel supported in the way that I needed to at work. I felt under-resourced and I needed to do so much more. And I think, again, the environment in tech itself was like, because there was this monetary deficit, everybody at the tippity top felt very anxious. And when people feel anxious, they need to control their controllables. It felt like we were sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping for it to stick, right? There was just so many outputs and everybody was just churning. And it didn't feel like I was progressing or heading in a good, positive direction.
So how does this part of your journey end?
Big thing for me was I got an awesome coach, and a major topic that I was covering was I was changing who I was to fit what I thought my manager and other people around me needed. And this woman showed me who I was, okay? And she was like, this is really interesting because, you're all about, women's empowerment and all of that, but you're changing who you are for these guys at the top. And she's like, so aren't you sort of enabling the patriarchy? And I was like, dog, I gotta go. Like, I'm done here. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's enough. What am I doing? You're absolutely right. Like, I'm twisting myself in a million ways and just being a completely different person and even like reverting in a lot of ways. Why am I doing this? Right. And thankfully I'd been working with Tara Goldman at the time, who you've already interviewed. She was actually my boss at a previous company. And then we went to this company together. And, after we had both left, we started coming up with ideas together, and it just like created our business out of these ideas. And we spent a lot of time doing a lot of research and testing ideas to get to the point where we were able to build GoldHue. It was kismet that we both had come to this place together, and then we left together, and now we're here. So again, I'm grateful for that experience. I always said I wanted to be a business owner, that I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I never thought I would own a like service company. I didn't see it happening this way, but it just did. And it feels like all roads have led here. And it's interesting because I talked to Tara the other day, and she was like, from the day I met you, I knew this was where you were going. You were way too much of a visionary to be like answering to a manager at a big company. And that's sort of how I feel like it's been, right? I was always meant to be here.
What's really interesting is talked about the realization that you were putting on a version of you that you didn't like, which I think is a really common thing. Like, I think one of the challenges of being a leader is having to pretend to be something that you're not, or having to put on an emotion that might not feel natural. Like the common example that I hear is, well, the executives or the inner circle, the leadership team did something that I don't agree with, that I know my team doesn't agree with. And now I have to go sort of hold the line and defend it with my team. Or for me to be an effective leader or an executive at my company, I need to put on a superhero suit, so to speak, an alter ego version of myself so that I can be effective there. And sometimes that can be a good thing because it can help you to bring out peak performance and might be the version of you that you need to play. And then other times it's not a good thing. So I'm curious, for people that are listening to this, how do they know if it's a good version of themselves that they're putting on that's not necessarily them all the time, or if it's not a good version of themselves? Because you said you identified that it wasn't a good version for you.
Yeah. I think just listening to yourself, you feel it, and you might not have the words for it just yet to understand what's happening. But if something feels wrong, that is when you know. And I think a lot of us are taught to sort of push that intuition down and not listen to it at all. But the more you start listening, the better your life is likely going to get, right? And just trusting yourself and what you're feeling, even if you don't know what it is just yet. Sort of tune in and start listening, and you'll get there. If it's bad or good, you'll know.
And what's the biggest lesson that you take away from this experience, right? So you work there, now you go off, you're running your own business. Yeah. What's the thing that you get to take with you from this?
I think personally, it really is going back to that thread of like trusting myself, not letting anybody or any environment rock your confidence or make you question who you are or if you should be there. And I think professionally, a load of skills that I've brought into my business and that I've brought to my clients. It's been really, really helpful. So there was so much upskilling that happened. I can't even list out like, here are the things that I learned and the skills that I took away. And I think the last thing is like, you can die tomorrow. And if you have not created the life, or at least created to the best of your abilities and with your resources, the life that you want to have, right? Like figure out a potential path or some way to get a little bit closer to that. I see so many people sort of like languishing in these jobs that they absolutely hate. And not everybody has the privilege to be able to just exit and go do their own thing. But people have asked me that. They're like, wow, isn't it a massive risk to leave your like high paying tech job? I'm like, yeah, but again, I could die tomorrow. So what's the risk? Like, I never try this thing. Are you kidding me? I have to. I couldn't live with myself if I was just languishing and suppressing that inner voice that was telling me that I needed to go take the next step.
I want to take a quick break in the podcast to tell you a little bit about my coaching programs at Delivering Value. I offer both one-to-one coaching and coaching for teams, where I walk you through my 4-phased approach designed to help you increase your influence and your impact if you're working in growth. We'll work on developing your growth model and your strategy to make sure you're pulling the right levers. We'll work on installing a repeatable operating system to get the work done with a focus on experimentation. We'll work on implementing both the strategy and the operating system, which is all about collaborating with other teams and communication and alignment and the leadership skills needed to execute this kind of cross-functional work. And we'll zoom in on specific frameworks to help you break through your plateaus and bottlenecks. It's a mix of coaching calls over Zoom and async collaboration with me. I've supported amazing people all over the globe, from companies like Copy.ai, Notion, Sprout Social, Pendo, Lucia, ProWriting Aid, Motion, and a bunch of others. And visit my website, deliveringvalue.co/coaching, which I'll put a link to in the description. You can learn more and maybe set up a call to see if we vibe. That's the thing that motivates me too. I couldn't live with myself not knowing what's on the other side. I have to look. If I try to look over there and it doesn't work out, I can live with that. I'm good with that. But I couldn't be satisfied with myself not knowing. So that resonates with me. So a few minutes ago, you were talking about kind of questioning yourself and questioning who you are. I talk to folks all the time who do this, and it's typically because they get some feedback that catches them off guard. So I want to double click on feedback as a theme. And so for you, what is some challenging feedback that you've received that's made you question things?
Yeah. So I've gotten some really good feedback in my career, particularly from my business partner, who was like the ultimate feedback giver. And there were sort of like small tweaks on my work or like ways I could communicate my ideas a little bit better, because I again, like I'm always a big picture thinker. So she helped me along the way to sort of distill those ideas down into a way that would resonate with people and that could be communicated in a really good, concise sort of storytelling manner. So that's some great feedback I've gotten. And I've gotten really trash feedback as well, like particularly around any personality adjustments, I think. Professionalism. I'm like, what even is a be more strategic? I'm like,
oh, I hate that feedback. Yeah, the be more strategic. I talked to someone yesterday who was telling me they got feedback they needed to be more data driven. I was like, what does that even mean?
What are you saying? And they're often saying these things with no examples of like what good looks like.
Yeah.
And a lot of that feedback, now that I'm older, I've sort of learned, I'm like, oh, a lot of this is like steeped in really terrible biases, right?
So you had mentioned that there's some higher level feedback for you. Is there a theme that has been like a thread that's followed you?
Yeah,
around?
I think it's that. I think it's just like people have not encouraged me to bring my whole self to the workplace except my business partner when she was my manager. She was like, what? Tell jokes, be sarcastic. Like, that's your personality. Be yourself and be comfortable and confident in who you are. So I think it was always that like professionalism thread that followed me around. And I'm sure there were moments where that could have been true. But again, I am a queer neurodivergent woman. So like professionalism, to me is like emulate a straight white dude in corporate America. And I'm like, I'm never going to be that. It's not going to work out for me. What am I like? I'm twisting myself into a million ways to emulate a specific persona that I can never be. This doesn't even make sense.
And so I hate pieces of feedback like this, especially ones that feel like it's not a decision that you've made, not a thing that you did or didn't do, but it's sort of who you are a little bit. It's like your personality at its core. And a lot of times there are things that we like about ourselves, right? You talked about being in high school, being creative. You talked about making jokes and keeping things light. Like that's your superpower, right? But all of a sudden in a professional setting, someone could have the POV that it's a bug and not a feature.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm curious to know if you have overcorrected to this along the way. Like were there times where you wore like adult clothes or you tried to speak a certain way or had longer pauses? Like, did you try any of that shit in your journey?
Incessantly. How I spoke, the words that I use. My friend Jenny calls it business word bingo, where she's like, what are you even saying at this point? Like, it's just a bunch of jargon and bullshit. And I had to actually unlearn a lot of that from my last role because that's all I was doing all day. I was completely leaning away from who I was. And I feel like there's no way that people couldn't tell that I wasn't uncomfortable in some way or probably awkward or something. So yeah, I definitely tried it out in many different forms and ways, and it's always felt not good, icky.
I think we've all been in a room, virtual or in person, with someone who's trying this. And it's like there's some sort of like incongruent thing that's going on where you ask a person a question and then they say some stuff back and you almost have no idea what they're even saying.
Yes.
And you kind of look at them and you're like, do you know what you're saying?
Totally.
And then somewhere around the room you look and then someone's like nodding along and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, have you ever been in that room?
You just reminded me of, I don't know if you've seen, totally off topic, but the Wicked interview with Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. And like the interviewer asked such a bizarre question. She's like, do you know people are holding space for the song Defying Gravity? And Cynthia Erivo was like, wow, I didn't know anybody was doing that. And Ariana Grande is just like looking around. And she admits later, she's like, I had no idea what that interviewer was asking. And then Cynthia responded this way. So it was like, you know, I just agreed with it and whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I've done this a million times.
Yeah.
The difference is back in the day, I would have been like, man, I'm probably just dumb. Like, I don't know what's going on. They probably know what's going on.
I think most of us tell ourselves that story, right?
I'm like, wow, they're saying something so smart that I don't even know what it means.
Right. We blame ourselves when in reality, it's like that person trying on a thing that doesn't fit.
Exactly. So now I am much more observant of that. And I also am not afraid to be like, yeah, can you run that back, but like differently? Because I know.
Right. It's like you got to update the ChatGPT prompt. Like, could you explain it at like a lower educational level?
Totally. Or just like say different words because those are I don't know what you're doing, but it's bizarre. So I feel a little bit more confident to push that a little bit, but I do have empathy, right? Because I've been that person.
Of course, right.
But hopefully me just being like, hey, I'm actually, I don't understand what you're saying, it enables them to show their personality and speak a little bit more normally, say whatever they were actually thinking of saying rather than made up jargon.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say empathy. I was working with a coach for a few years, and I remember kind of asking her about a situation like this where I was in the room and someone above me said some stuff that just didn't make any sense. And I was kind of venting about it to my coach. And I was like, I don't even understand why they're talking like that. And eventually she got me to a place where it was like, well, why are they talking like that? Well, they're trying to posture. Why do they care to posture? Because they're feeling insecure. Why are they feeling insecure? Because they haven't had a win in a while, right? Those are
totally.
I'm simplifying the story, but when you realize that, it kind of changed it, at least for me anyways, It changed the way I heard a lot of that stuff. I listened to the things that weren't being said, and that changed things. Right. So what advice would you give to someone who's feeling a little bit of that pressure? Maybe they've gotten similar or like adjacent feedback, which is like, you got to work on your executive presence or more strategic ability, or the person I chatted with yesterday, they've got to be more data driven. What advice would you give to someone who's struggling with one of those types of feedback?
I'd say if somebody's giving you that feedback, put pressure on them to give you concrete examples and the impact of whatever that is, and ask them to be very clear about, okay, if this is not good, then what does good look like? That's one route. The other route is stop listening, because this executive presence, this professionalism bullshit is all straight up misogyny, racism, homophobia. That's what it is, plain and simple. So that is what's going on. Stop listening to it. It's trash. But if you are given other pieces of feedback that are actually legitimate, dig in and seek to understand. And again, ask them for, okay, what does good look like then? And like, you know, is there a metric that I can associate with this change as well? And you know, get very clear and aligned on what that looks like.
I feel like the prevailing wisdom is it's someone else's job to give you the feedback. It's your job to decide if you want to accept it or not. I feel like that's a thing that people say, but in practice, that's really hard. And so what I think you just shared is maybe a framework to decide which of those routes to go on. If they can share an example and it's specific and there's a metric and they can point at things you did or didn't do or should do, but you haven't done, that to me is something where you can take action and work on bettering yourself. But if it's not that, it's those other things, and you get to decide if you want to listen to that or carry it with you.
Exactly. Yeah. And
so you've talked a little bit about today about feeling anxious with the presentation, kind of overcoming fear, doing things anyways. I'm curious if there's been another time in your journey where you've struggled with that anxiousness, or maybe even a little bit of imposter syndrome might have flared up a little bit for you. That's something I hear all the time from folks, is that they feel uncomfortable and they sort of blame themselves. That's how I think about imposter syndrome a little bit. They feel less than worthy of their accolades or success.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, look, as I mentioned, like I've felt this persistent undercurrent of anxiety throughout my life, not just my career. As for imposter syndrome, I think this is like one of the most insane things to come out of corporate America. I truly believe that corporate America was not created for any marginalized community at all. And the fact that we can't fit in, and they created a made up syndrome so that we could further gaslight ourselves, is the craziest, most toxic thing I've ever heard in my life.
I'm laughing, but I'm laughing with you. I just never thought about it through that lens.
Oh yeah, it's like a completely weaponized thing. Like it's
right. So it's like I feel uncomfortable and I'm going to blame myself.
Right. But like, let's take a look at corporate America and how the system is set up and who set it up and why it is the way it is, and then why you might not feel comfortable in it. Like the room was never made for you. So that's why you don't feel good in it. So again, do not gaslight yourself. Understand the environment for what it is.
A theme of your journey has been finding yourself and discovery and resilience and learning where you're happiest and what suits you want to wear and what suits you don't want to wear. I'm curious if there's a turning point in your life where that also shines through?
Yeah, I think, again, there was so much that I learned from myself over the past few years prior to even starting my business. And I sort of lost myself for quite a bit. And it follows that theme of sort of contorting myself to fit in or become a persona that I wanted to be rather than who I really was or who I really wanted to be, I guess. And I think it was, just a money obsession. Like I started just chasing money to the point of like, that's all I cared about was making more and more and more. And the reality, I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. I actually had a friend sit me down and she was like, yeah, like this whole thing that you're doing now just doesn't really feel like you, Like when you were doing all like the nonprofit stuff and then you have your like sort of artsy stuff, like that feels like you. This feels like so distant from who you are. And that made me sit down and really think about it. And it was that, right? And there was even times where I would get raises at work that were sizable. And I felt it for like a minute. And I was like, all right, cool. Like I had grown accustomed to it in a really disturbing way. And I think over the past year or so, I've sort of come to realize, and again, maybe this is from a privileged perspective, that it doesn't impress me for people to make loads and loads of money. Like it impresses me for people to get really comfortable with themselves and moving towards that state where you feel your best and where you feel your strongest and you're and the most yourself. Like that's what impresses me. You know what I mean? Because that's so much more sustainable and interesting. And it's way more challenging, in my opinion, to really work on that and wake up every day and look in the mirror. And that's something that I do every day now that I own a business. And it's something that somebody said to me before I started it. They were like, look, if you run your own company, it is a mirror every single day. And that's really hard, but it does help you learn and push you to grow and help you create that home in your body and become much more comfortable.
It's funny, I got similar advice. When I first went on my own, I got advice not to say yes to everything, especially the stuff that might pay you a lot of money that might leave you feeling unfulfilled. Because then you end up with a job that you hate and you're the reason why, and then you blame yourself and you feel even worse about it long term. So that really resonates. Did something change though? I'm curious to know. So like early in your journey, you talked about you kind of where you come from and the priorities that you had and the goals and ambitions that you had in life. And then it sounds like for some period of time, maybe your North Star changed, right? So you're chasing money a little bit over happiness, maybe at the cost of happiness, it sounds like in some cases, and then you've recalibrated a little bit. What caused that middle period, do you think? What was the motivation behind that? Were you trying to become something? Did you have some like goals? Were you trying to buy a house or like,
yeah,
was there something you were trying to grow and become?
No, I want to say yes, but the answer is actually no. And I'll tell you how I know that is the case. And it's because I was just rattling off to my therapist as I do, bless her. And I was like, yeah. And when I get there, and she was like, okay, what's there? And I was like, I have no idea what there is. Like, I don't have an end goal or an ideal state in mind. So like, again, I think money is the default because we live in a capitalist, highly competitive society. So it's like, if you have no North Star, it's going to be cash. And that is why so many people are upset. Obviously, like you need it as a means to live, right? So it is absolutely something that's necessary. It makes life a lot more comfortable. And there's this thought of like, if I work really hard, I can make more and more of it. And it's very addictive to be in that place, right? But again, it's sort of like the easiest, health score, I guess, in America, at least. Like the health score is like how much money you have, what your net worth is, not like how much fulfillment you are getting out of your life or how like physically or mentally healthy you are. So I realized I didn't have a goal. I wasn't heading anywhere. I just did like the default of like, everybody wants to get money. So me too.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's why it's so important to have some goals or some metrics or some vision board or something that you're working towards. Because if not, there's a vacuum and you fill that vacuum maybe with the wrong stuff. And then you're chasing something you don't want. And then what I've learned is even if you're chasing it, when you get it, then you feel even more lost.
Exactly.
Because then you don't have a thing to chase.
Another thing. 100% that was another thing. What I just mentioned before of like, and then I would get a raise and I would feel it for a second and that's it. And you're totally right. When you hit the point, you're like, oh, like I made it. And you realize it's not all you chucked. It is such a hard and devastating fall. And I also want to tack onto your vision board. It is corny, but it does help.
I don't think it's corny. I got a vision board over here. I got my goals on my whiteboard over here. Like, I live that. I have a manifestation journle on my desk that's
Andrew,
just outside of the camera.
We both have vision boards doesn't mean it's not corny. Okay, I just want to clarify here. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, it is right. Like it's super helpful to just sit down and be like,
yeah,
here's my ideal state, and sort of update that every so often because it changes, right? But like, how can you have a strategy and a a roadmap now to get product on you if you don't have like, here is where I'm heading?
When it's hard to know if you're making progress, if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I read this book a couple weeks back called The Millionaire Mind, which kind of sounds like a douchebag book to read, but it's less about how to make $1 million and it's more about, is there a difference in the mindset of people who become millionaires versus the rest of us? And in it, it says there are two things that prevent most people from being successful, whether it's financially or however you define success. One is that they can't articulate what success looks like. They know they want it, which is kind of what you shared, right? When I get there, when your therapist asks, well, where is there? Where do you want to get to? And you didn't really know. So they have a hard time articulating what success is. And then they don't fully commit to being the person who is that, who will become that. And so to me, having a vision board and stuff like that helps me with both of those. It's like, it helps me to figure out what success looks like for me. And it reminds me that I am that person who's on that journey. And I need that reminder, or else I forget, or I get distracted, or I don't reward myself for living the thing that I want to be doing.
Right. Totally.
All right. So you got me on a tangent there. So let's bring it back around. For you today, what are the habits and rituals that you lean on to bring out the best version of you on a day-to-day professional basis?
So I have my airport dashboard. So that sort of like helps me figure out like where I need to spend a little bit more time and energy. But I think the things that energize me are, number one, I work out usually at least five or 6 days a week and just keep that really consistent. Ideally, I eat well. I like to cook a lot and experiment. So sometimes I'm like, let me mess around, eat a dish that has like a full stick of butter in it, right? Like I can't control that. It has to happen. Cooking definitely keeps me grounded. That's like my wind up and wind down ritual. I've gotten like super into coffee. My friend Gabe made fun of me because I had an espresso. He's like, you absolutely need to get a real espresso machine and like beans, and like this is going to help you get like those moments of peace throughout the day. So that's really big for me.
Did you get like one of the $2,000 machines, like one of the crazy ones?
No, it's like a Breville something.
I was gonna say I got a little one, but it's like $75 on Facebook Marketplace, kind of a thing.
You don't need to go nuts. Even honestly, like I vouch for the mocha pot. Like that thing is like $25-$30. It makes some of the best coffee. Those are sort of like my little creature comforts, and I like to do something creative in the day, right? So like I play guitar, or like I'll write something so I'm not behaving like a robot all day. And I also just spend a lot of time with my partner and our dog, and we enjoy each other's company so much. And that's like a ritual that just keeps me so grounded. It's like hanging out with them before and after work. And I try to add in a little bit of fun. I can tend to, when I get anxious, I over index on like high routine, high structure, and like anything that knocks me off sends me into oblivion. So I try to not be too structured, too regimented. Like there are people that are like, I wake up every day at 4 a.m. to do this, and this. If I live that way, it's not going to go well for me. And yeah, I like to hang with friends as much as I can. And then I'm a TikTok fiend, Andrew. I hate to admit it, but like I am.
I don't think there's anything to admit. It's the app is made to do that.
It's made to do that. And I am powerless to the app. Okay. So I'm on there. I love seeing like good, funny content. And then I see some of the news and I just get depressed. So I try to like put that in drip. So those are my rituals. And I look at my day every single day. I reorganize my calendar to make sure that like I have enough thinking time and not overloading myself. But sometimes the days are like that. So.
And if you could go back in time, what's a soft skill that you wish you'd worked on more earlier that would have been helpful?
Man, there are so many. I have learned multiple languages. I got very good at Italian at one point. Don't have it anymore. Would love another language. I think that counts as a soft skill, right? And then one more thing would just be seeking to understand, right? And like approaching everything with curiosity. Somebody once gave me the advice of like, every time you feel like you're going to get angry, get curious instead. And I think when I was younger, I had a lot of binary thinking. I had a lot of like my emotions were quick to react. And if I had just like sat there and sort of tried to understand somebody else's perspective a little bit more, I think that's a really, really good skill to have. And it's something that you mentioned, right, that your coach armed you with, of like, why is this person behaving this way? Like, what's going on in the background? And that sort of makes life just easier to get through. You know what I mean? When you're like, understand that everybody is fighting their own battles, having their own experiences, developing their own perspective, right? We really are just the sum of all of our experiences, right? So just leaning into that, seeking to understand people no matter what, even though sometimes it's hard.
And for folks who are listening, what haven't you said that you want them to take away from some of the stories and lessons that you shared with us today? Anything that's left unsaid?
I think, again, just double tapping on that, life is short. Do not let yourself not explore something that you find really interesting, or that could be like a big, wonderful journey. Risk taking is scary, but usually the risks are worth taking as long as they're not skydiving without a parachute, maybe.
Well, thank you for coming on, sharing some of your wisdom and your story with us. So for folks who are listening that want to follow and interact with you, we'll put links in the show notes, but where should we send them?
I'm active on LinkedIn. Yes. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn under Mackenzie Hughes. And yeah, would be happy to chat with anybody about any topics that we discussed or anything else.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.